Today I'm going to show you how to make infographics and data visualizations using a really powerful workflow that involves creating your base graphics here in this free open source online tool called RawGraphs, and then porting them over to a vector graphics program like Adobe Illustrator to customize them. And this, like I said, is really powerful workflow that lets you make custom and really sort of bespoke infographics that can look however you want. And what I'm going to show you today is really just the beginning, and I'll give you some resources at the end of how to take this sort of to the next level. One thing to keep in mind is that all the graphics we're going to make today are going to be static image, like PNG or SVG based graphics, so they won't have any interactivity, but giving up the interactivity gives us the opportunity to really customize these in ways that we might not have been able to otherwise if we were working in code. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. First thing you want to do is go to rawgraphs.io, and this is the homepage for this tool, which, like I said, is really nice. We'll go ahead and click on Use It Now, and that'll pop open the interface for RawGraphs. And the first thing we want to do, like every graphics program, is we want to start out by inserting our data, and we want to insert tabular data as a CSV or other format like TSV or JSON. We'll just work with CSVs today. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to use one of their data samples, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a couple minutes. I'm going to grab this this data set here, which pulls in data from Game of Thrones, which I have to admit isn't a show I've watched, but this is a good data set to show you this sort of first example of an arc diagram. So this shows relationships between the two families, or the two main families or clans in Game of Thrones. And so we can see our data has the source, and then the target, right? So these are two fields that we'll need, right, when we're creating our connections in the arc graph, and then the weight of those connections. And this will make a little bit more sense as we graph this out. Oops, it's a little outside my browser. I want to pull this in a little bit. Okay, so next thing we do is we choose our chart type, and this is where RawGraphs really shines. This has really interesting and unusual chart types that you might not find in other graphics programs. Things like alluvial diagrams and arc diagrams, B-swarm plots, calendar heat maps, contour plots, sunbursts, violin plots. There's all kinds of really interesting graph types that you can create in RawGraphs that a lot of other programs don't offer. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and choose arc diagram, and the next thing we do is we map our data to our chart variables. So every chart type is going to have some different chart variables that you're going to need to map your data to, and we'll talk a little bit more about how to get your head around that in a few. But for the arc diagram, we have three. We have our source, our target, and our size, and you'll notice that's exactly how this data is set up. And unlike some other graphics programs, you're really going to want to format your data before you go into RawGraphs to sort of fit what they're looking for, right? There's not too many ways, to modify the data in here, so it's easier to modify your data like in Sheets or R or Excel. Format your columns the way that RawGraphs wants them before you bring it into the program. Okay, so this one's going to be really easy because we've already sort of arranged our data exactly the way that RawGraphs is looking for. So we can just we want our source column to go and to be our source variable, target to target node, and weight over to size. And what RawGraphs does is it draws that graph for us down at the bottom. And if we, try to map any data that doesn't make sense, right, like an incorrect data type or something that it can't use, it'll let us know. We'll have to go back and modify the data. But this is nice and clean. It's all set up exactly for this. You can see it created this nice arc diagram for us. And it gives us some options to customize here. We have some customize options up at the top, and then some more chart options down at the bottom. But ultimately, the idea with RawGraphs is we're going to create our chart here in RawGraphs, and then we're going to export as an SVG and open that SVG up in Illustrator to really do a lot of our customization. But we can do a few things here, and let's go ahead and do that, okay? So let's make our width, let's go ahead and make it, let's just put it at a good screen size. We'll do 1280, and we'll make our height 720. For our we're going to add some margins to the bottom. You can see things are kind of going outside of our canvas here, so I'll make that 100. Does that get us there? Not quite. So let's, oh, and actually I want to choose option, let's see if I can find it here. Arcs on top only. So right now it's creating our arcs both on the top and the bottom. That's sort of indicative of some of the data, but we're going to change this so our arcs are only on the top. So that's how I want it to look. You can see the way these arc diagrams work is it's laid out every character that the data looks at, and then it's mapping the connections between those characters, right? So Anna Stark and let's see who she goes to. Okay, how about the person next to her, this Cersei Lannister, right? So we can see there's a connection between them, and then the width of the line in the arc indicates like the size of that connection, or how close they were, or how many times they communicated, depending on how the data was connected, right? So thicker line indicates a stronger connection between these characters. All right, great. So this is all I'm really going to change. You know, we can change some other things here, and it's always worth playing around with some of these options to sort of get it to where you want. But for this particular chart, this is all I'm really looking for. And I'm going to go ahead and export this so I can save it however I want. I'll just call it GOT Viz Raw so that I know this is the export from RawGraphs. I'll go ahead and download that. Let's see, I probably put it in my downloads folder. So GOT, so let me go ahead and find that. Here we go. Okay, and I'm going to open that with Adobe Illustrator. Drag this over here so we can see. And so here we've got this SVG from RawGraphs. It's exactly what we created in RawGraphs. And so the great thing here is because this is a vector file, an SVG, scalable vector graphic, Illustrator is going to let us select every single point in this and change whatever we want. It's going to come over as like a whole thing. First thing out, it's going to come over as like all grouped together. So we want to ungroup things and sort of take it apart so we can start modifying individual aspects of it. The first thing I'll do is I'll just select this background and I'm just going to delete it. I'll put my own background back in later. The other thing I could do, I'll put that background back. I could just lock it. Object lock selection. Because what will happen is anytime I click on the background, if it's not locked, it'll select that, and that's kind of a pain. Okay, so next I'll select the graphic itself, and I'm just going to start ungrouping things. And I might just hit ungroup like a bunch of times here, because everything's going to be grouped together in some different ways. And ultimately, okay, it looks like it's getting down to, oh yeah, this is pretty much what I want. I want to be able to select different lines here and modify them in whatever way I want. So, you know, we could do all kinds of stuff here, right? I mean, at the very basic level, we could start changing colors, right? We could maybe change the color. Maybe we, for instance, want to grab every line that comes out of, you know, all the lines and change them to a red, right? And we could just change all the lines. It'd probably be more interesting if we selected all the lines that originated from Stark and changed them one color, and all the lines that originated from a Lannister and made them a different color, which was fine. Which we could definitely do. We'd have to sort of zoom in and individually select some lines, so it would take a little work, but no big deal. We can also select all of the type, right? And one thing that you can, there are some selection tools in Illustrator that I probably showed in our Illustrator demo that could help with this. Like we could go to select same appearance, and that's going to go, and Illustrator is going to try to figure out what you mean by that, and does a pretty good job, and figured out you want all the type, right? And we could change that to, maybe we won't want to change it to, let's change it to hobo. No, I'm just kidding. All right, let's change it to, see what we've got. Montserrat. And then maybe we want to move it down a little bit, and we could make it bold. Maybe we want to make it smaller. You'll see, in my final example, I actually scaled it a little bit. We could change the color to whatever we wanted. There's all kinds of things we can do. We could obviously unlock that background and change that if we wanted it to be black. We could start adding in our own type up here if we wanted to add in a headline. Let's make the headline white, and let's make it much, much bigger. And so we could really start improving this and really just doing whatever we wanted with it. If we made the background black, we'd probably want to make all of those dots a different color, maybe a white, etc. So anyway, this will be a time-consuming process, but the sky is really the limit. As whatever you can envision and whatever you can pull off in Illustrator, you can do to this graphic. And I'll go ahead, instead of in these examples sort of making you guys watch me tediously modify Illustrator graphics in Illustrator, I'll just show you guys sort of what I came up with in the end for a lot of these graphics. This one, I'll admit, I was never really super happy with how this came out in the end. But you can see, right, I vastly improved it and made it into a much more interesting graphic. I added a headline. I added these two little banners, which represent these houses in Game of Thrones. I changed the colors to red and green. I changed these dots to tan. I changed the text to white and sort of scaled it a little bit, and it's just a much more visually interesting graphic than we had before. Okay, so let's take a look now at, I'm going to go ahead and close these down. Let's take a look at how about how I learned how to do some of this stuff, because RawGraphs has a really great tutorial system. If we go down to charts and templates, so you can choose any of the chart types for RawGraphs, and it'll give you a quick little demo on how to create it using that sample data that I used to make that art diagram that we used a second ago. So for instance, if we wanted to make a bump chart, which is what we'll make next, it'll just show you a quick little 2-minute video that goes through how to make this bump chart using the data, the sample data that's available in RawGraphs. So this is how I learned how to do all of these that we're doing in the demo, and how I've learned how to do everything I do in RawGraphs is I decide what kind of chart I want to learn, or what kind of chart I want to use. I watch the video, I recreate it using the sample data, and then I know how to modify my own data, get it ready to use in RawGraphs myself. So this has sort of been my workflow, and it works really nicely, and I sort of suggest you do that as well. Okay, let's go ahead and make another chart with RawGraphs. Okay, next I've got a little data that looks at Olympic medals from the 2018 Olympics, the Winter Olympics, and it just looks at the date of each day in the Olympics, each country, and how many gold, silver, and bronze medals they won for each day. And we're going to go ahead and create a nice little chart from this. So I'll just go ahead and copy, let's go ahead and copy all of this data, and just go ahead and paste that into RawGraphs. See, it accepts this tabular data really nicely. Okay, now I'd like to create a stream graph now, which is sort of like a stacked area chart. Instead of plotting values against a conventional y-axis, the stream graph offsets the baseline of each stack It makes it symmetrical around that x-axis, so it basically just stacks the areas on top of each other. But it's a really cool looking graphic, and lets you do some really interesting things. Okay, so it's like I said, it's like a stacked bar chart. So here you can see how this works, right? So it's like a stacked area chart rather, and I think you'll see how it works a little bit better once we actually create our graphic. Okay, so we want to go ahead and map our data, and let's see. I want to pull date over to my x-axis. I want to pull gold over to my size, because we're going to look at gold medals by day, and then I want to move country is what I actually want to stream. Right, so what we see here is each country has a little stream, and we'll fix this so it looks a little bit better. And we have the dates along the bottom, and the size of the area for each country is how many gold medals they won that day. So this is going to allow us to do a couple things. It's going to allow us to look at individual countries to see how they did over the course of the Olympics by day, right? So on Thursday the 15th, Norway, won this many medals. It looks like they did much better on Wednesday the 21st, etc. So they won more gold medals as they went along, which would and that's not the case for everyone, etc. And we can also look at a specific day and see how well each of the countries is doing on that specific day compared to each other. Okay, so let's go ahead and modify a few things here. We'll make I guess that's okay. Yeah, all this seems fine. So for chart, let's sort streams by ascending, right? So that'll make this a little bit easier to read. We're going to make the curve type monotone X, which is just going to smooth out the curves a little bit, make it look a little bit nicer. And let's see, let's look at the colors here. We've got our color scheme. What if we select, let's see. Okay, so now we've at least assigned like a different color for each country, and we'll clean this up a lot in Illustrator. But this is pretty much what I want to output, to bring into Illustrator to improve. We've got the streams ascending. We've created our graph, which would be really tough to do in Illustrator. I'm not sure how you'd go about it, right? So we've created the base for our chart, and now we can open it in Illustrator and improve it, right? There's a lot more we could do in Raw here, but I'm more comfortable working in Illustrator. Illustrator is obviously going to be a lot more customizable, so I'm just going to go ahead and export from here and work in Illustrator. Okay, so I'll just call this Olympics is raw. We'll download that, and we'll pop that open in Illustrator. Okay, so as you can see, it's much the same deal, right? Oops. We can start selecting different elements. I'll just go ahead and delete that. I want to go ahead and ungroup everything here, and there's lots we can do, right? There's lots of things we can do. Obviously, it's not super clear which of these, which countries with what stream. We can clear that up a little bit. We can change the colors. We can add some headlines and text and etc. And it's really just about sort of your imagination and your skills in Illustrator. And I'll go ahead and slide over here what I ended up doing with this particular graphic. So you can see, right, very similar. What I ended up doing was I ended up deleting, just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So I took the top 10 countries and I deleted everything underneath just to sort of make it a little bit easier to see. And I used the country abbreviations and made them white so you could see them easier. But I also put the name of the country and their flag next to each stream. And then I pulled the color for each stream out of the country's flag just to create a little bit of unity between them. I put a couple annotations, right, to show, just to give people a sense, since there's no scale here, just to give people a sense of what the width of each area meant, right? So this is 143, this is 43, just gives you a little bit of feeling there. Then I added in a headline and text. I put in some dates just to give people a sense of like where we were, and then just some credit and source down at the bottom. So I was really happy with the way this one turned out. I think it looks nice. I think it communicates the data pretty well. And yeah, it was a nice collaboration between Raw and Illustrator to create this final graphic. Okay, let's do one more. So the next one I'm going to show you guys is really my favorite. Okay, so we'll just go ahead and start over again. We'll just reset. And let me pull up this data set. So this is a mushroom data set that looks at different. So it's pulled from so let's see. Let's take a look at the source. Okay, so mushroom data set from the UCI machine learning repository. We took 200 mushrooms from the original data set. Mushroom records drawn from the Audubon Society Field Guide to North American mushrooms. So this looks at 200 different mushrooms pulled from this data set, and breaks it down into 3 categories. Is that mushroom edible? What's the odor of that mushroom, and what kind of surface do they have, right? So we're looking at qualities of these 200 different kinds of mushrooms. And we actually don't have the kind of mushroom in this data, but that's not important for the kind of graphic that we're going to create right now. Okay, so let's go ahead and grab that data. And I'm just going to paste it into Raw. And with this, we're going to create what's called an alluvial diagram, which is actually our first one right here, which will show correlations and proportions between different factors, right? So, or categories, categorical dimensions, as they say, and we'll show the flow between them. So we're actually going to look at how many of these mushrooms are edible or poisonous, and then from that, how many have a specific type of odor, and from that, how many of them have these different surfaces. And it'll make more sense once we get there at the end. So let's take a look. So let's map our data. So all we really want to do here is we just want to draw all 3 of our data columns down into steps. I'm going to move surface up there. Okay, and you can see it creates this alluvial diagram that starts with whether the mushroom is edible or poisonous, right? Inedible. And then, okay, so if it's poisonous, this many flow down to being scaly, this many to smooth, this many to fibrous, right? So it goes from edible to surface. And then it breaks those further down into the type of odor that they have, right? And we could actually do this the other way. We could put edible at the bottom, which might make sense, right? So maybe you're looking at a mushroom and you say, okay, it's spicy, it's smooth, all right, it's most likely to be poisonous. Though I don't think anybody should really use this infographic to decide what mushrooms they're going to eat out in the woods. There's probably better sources for that. But this is an interesting way to look at the data to see sort of how edible or poisonous mushrooms break down into these different categories, or the characteristics that they most commonly have. Okay, so I'm going to change a couple things here just to make this more legible before we export it. I'll this to 1080 by 720. I want to add some margins just because things are a little tight here. Okay, I just want to make sure we can see everything. Yeah, okay, I think we can see everything there. Great. So let's change a few things in chart. So for the nodes, I'm actually going to minimize overlaps because that'll make it a little bit easier to read. And I think that's all I'm really going to change. Let's take this over to Illustrator. And again, the same way. Pop that open in Illustrator. And again, same workflow, right? We can ungroup, okay, we can delete our background and then just start ungrouping everything so that we can, oops, okay, so that we can start selecting different parts. I think I locked it here by accident. Okay, there we go. So we have to ungroup and ungroup and ungroup. And what's going to be a little tough about this one is what you have to do to get a flow is you have to hit the line that's in the middle, because the way this is created is it's a line with a big fat stroke around it. Okay. So anyway, there's lots we can do here, right? I mean, I think what we'd really want to hit here at the very least, we want to add a headline and chatter. We probably want to change these colors a little bit. And we want to make sure that all the text is very, very readable here, just so people can understand this graphic a little bit more. So that's ultimately what I ended up doing. Again, I really like this graphic and the way that it turned out in the end. I think it's kind of fun. And I wrote a fun headline and subhead, "Can I eat this mushroom? Not so fast." And some chatter, right, about what this data is and where it comes from, and sort of saying, you know, these are not foolproof identifiers. So I made like a mushroomy type color palette, right? I looked for color palettes that were pulled from mushroom colors and used those. And I tried to make all the text more readable. And the other thing I did is I changed some colors in the type to sort of like identify, right? So the green is used for the odor, this color is used for the poisonous, right? This color is used for edible. So just sort of referencing the color palettes that I'm using in the graphic, in the chatter, to help identify that data and help people understand what's going on. But yeah, this was a fun graphic, and I think it turned out pretty nicely in the end. So that's RawGraphics, or the sort of workflow of RawGraphs to Illustrator, and there's so much you can do with this. There's just so many great chart types in RawGraphs, and so much that you can do in Illustrator, and lots of the really great data visualizations that we see out there from people like Federica Frangipani, use Raw in some way or another as a sort of baseline for their graphics. So this is a course I took in Domestica that Frederica put together, and she's got just amazing projects where she creates really sort of artful data visualizations that are really customizable, and you kind of think, well, how did she do that? And she shows in this Domestica course that she uses RawGraphs to plot the data, then takes it over to Illustrator, and really just ends up deleting the background chart, but using the plots that were created in RawGraphs as the structure to create her own art elements and her own visualizations, right? So you can see she completely recreates, and these are actually student examples, but this is students that have come out of this course, right? So using RawGraphs to plot your data and then creating your art elements in Illustrator to create something totally new. So this is a course that I recommend if you're interested in going further. But just from what I taught you guys today, I think you can make really interesting and really sort of complex and cool looking infographics and data visualizations with this very powerful workflow.